Welcome back to the Commerce Collective podcast brought to you by Flywheel. My name is Emma Irwin and I am your host for the series as well as a brand marketing manager over here. Today, we have one of the biggest names in the Ecomm retail CPG business who might just also be the co-host of one of the most well-known podcasts in the business, if not the most well-known. Which I know, it's crazy that we don't hold this title over here. But without further ado, let's meet our guest for today.
Shri left corporate America approximately 3 months ago to work on my own ventures. Run a podcast called the CPG Guys, about 400 episodes deep for those of you who didn't listen in. Also have a consulting company called Think Blue, which works with some of the largest brands and retailers in the world already. We're fortunate that we're already in business and we're concurrently on 4 different assignments. Right in the middle of consumer centricity, focused on helping brands and retailers get back to their ways of growing volume, understanding the omnichannel consumer, and running through the path to purchase along the shopper journey and making sure that they can claim every piece of loyalty that they deserve for the amazing equities they built, whether you're a retailer.
And that's not all. Shri also manages a record label, has the coolest daughters who are well-known musicians and performing artists, and he has 30 years of CPG experience from Circana to PepsiCo to Johnson & Johnson to Revlon to General Mills. No biggie. Before we really get into it, I of course needed to know what the last thing Shri purchased online was.
This is going to be such an interesting one, Emma.
Ooh.
So I'm trying to get a digital lock for my front door.
Okay.
Our front door is about 30 years old. It's a very custom aluminum iron die-cast door that was made 30 years ago with a very narrow frame to fit a lock. You buy the standard ones from Kwikset and some of the very popular ones, digital locks. They make a certain size for the padlock. It's a standard. Now I've learned they either 1.5 or 3/4 inches. We don't have 2.5 inches to fit that on the frame. So guess where I went to find a narrow digital door lock? Because I looked on 10 different websites. I went to Home Depot and I went to Lowe's and I couldn't find them. Obviously, I went to Amazon and I typed narrow digital door lock. The third listing was exactly what I needed. Exactly.
I love that.
What I needed. Ordered it. Next day fulfillment. Sitting in my dining table yesterday, my wife said, "Lock's here." I, of course, dismantled the whole thing, put it against the door, fits like a charm, called the locksmith. 5 p.m. Pacific today, I'll have my digital lock. That tells you a little bit of a story about how powerful Amazon is when you need something urgently, and it's something that's not just run-of-the-mill available everywhere else. Like literally, I now feel there's only one platform I can find stuff on.
With that out of the way, in this episode, we are going to cover what Shri is hypothesizing is a slowing down in e-commerce investments due to inflation-based pricing that has overall slowed down volume for CPG brands. After we dig into that for a bit, we'll then shift over to talking about how that concept impacts retail media and how we need to look at an industry that's incredibly complex and ever-changing that also requires incredibly agile leadership. All right, let's get into the why and maybe even the miscalculations of e-com investments seeming to slow down.
First, I want to publicly state that that's a misguided formula brands are doing. But you're 100% right, Emma. E-com investments are slowing, but it's wrong and it's misguided. Again, my opinion, the CPG, I know Peter shares this with me, so I'll say it's the CPG guy's opinion. You ask my Think Blue partners, one from retail who was a merchant, Parag and Manish, who ran Ecomm for Kellanova, he'll tell you the same thing. And here's the reason why. So in the last 19 odd months, since about March 15th, when Snap and EBT dollars dried up in the ecosystem, mid-tier and large brands are really struggling for volume. Why are they struggling for volume? Because of inflation and all the price increases the last 3 years. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm not saying anybody did anything wrong because I was part and parcel of that ecosystem myself, right? But there's a logical point 18, 19 months later where you have to look at your performance and you have to acknowledge what is the number one factor behind it. And we're there now. So the lack of volume is being compensated by removal of funding and investments from where there was significant investments the last 3 years during COVID, from about 2020 April, May or so till about 2023 April, May or so. I don't think we can sit here and debate that e-commerce became one of the most important channels in the history of retail. That's just factual. People would always counter to, but brick and mortar is 83% of business. Well, gee whiz, thanks. Of course, it's always going to be like 70% of your business, even 10 years out. But people forget the plot. The plot is not where the item is bought, it's where the item is researched by the consumer, where the item is first interacted by the consumer. Like, I'm one of those that's convinced that literally a year from now, I'm not talking somewhere in the future where aliens have come to Earth and we've sent 3 colonies to Mars, which is how most people talk to me about these things about, and I just smile. I'm talking a year from now, innovation that's launched in the marketplace will first be encountered digitally. So TikTok needs to be a weapon. All why do I say all this stuff? Simple reason that 95% of things that are bought in the marketplace, and I'm not talking just grocery here, I'm including general merchandise, are digitally influenced. There's no debate about it. But if 95% of your volume is digitally influenced, shouldn't your investments follow a similar path? I'm not saying make 95% of every investment you make digital, because then we're starting to now ask a question about the knowledge of every executive team in America. I'm just saying if the consumer is 95% digitally influenced, you should have a set of strong investments to back that up. Like, we shouldn't be sitting here and debating it, because if you don't, what large brands have called ankle biters will continuously take away your distribution. And then you don't get to complain, which is the story of the last 18 months. And so, what companies are doing to offset the volume loss is they're pulling back on investments across the board. One of the areas senior leaders that have come in, changed roles, et cetera, have walked in and said is, oh my God, we're putting $100 million in Ecomm. I don't like the structure. It should be sitting here. It should be sitting there. If you go back 5, 6 years in history and over COVID, the way the structures have changed, there was a central Ecomm team with the knowledge, like solid, thorough knowledge of digital. And now what's happened in the last, I would say, 6 months is there's this desire to move all those teams into individual customer teams, back into brands. There's only one problem, Emma. The knowledge doesn't exist. So we can argue both sides of the fence here. We can say, are we going to deny that knowledge for the brand teams and field retail teams forever? Well, here's my simple answer. In a moment of crisis, when you're struggling for volume, you do what's right for your business and you do what's right for the consumer. If you had to keep it as a central team to drive volume, you have no business splitting it apart and moving it into 15 different places. And that's what I'm observing. You got to fix volume. Once volume's fixed, move them wherever you want, get rid of people. Double, triple down on training before you do that.
Basic economics here in that if the price of goods goes up, consumers buy fewer things. But that's just too basic. I wanted Sri to put this together specifically from the lens of Ecomm just so that things are crystal clear.
Very simple. Let's say you had $100 in your pocket and you were buying 10 items at $10 each. Those $10 items now cost $13, which is the average price increase we saw in CPG land, including general merchandise, approximately 30% over 3.5 years, largely driven by commodity price increases, labor costs, things of that nature. Now, all of a sudden, if you're paying $13, you can only buy 7.5 units of that item. You never buy half a unit. And CPG brands are simply not fast enough to create pack sizes to support that 8th unit. So you're really only buying 7 units. So you were buying 10, you're buying 7, your volume now that you're affording that brand is down 20, 25 points. In reality, you do the math, you aggregate it, you true it up. Most mid-tier and large market cap brands are suffering about I would say a 500 basis point volume loss. And this, I'm partners with NIQ, so I get to see data. We're also partnering, as I mentioned up front, Think Blue, with several brands and retailers. So we're looking at a lot of data. That's like an average number, which is going to vary by category. But let's say I'll make it up. You're a $5 billion brand. A 5% loss in volume is equated to about $250 million in sales. At an average price point of, let's say, $5, again, made up number, you divide 250 million by 5, you're losing 50 million units. It's no joke. You're not going to make that up. But there's only one channel, Emma, that's still going to be the fastest growing channel. No debate. Absolutely no debate. Do you know what that is, Emma? E-commerce.
I was going to guess e-commerce. I was
But if
on the
you're
right.
pulling investments away, are you going to get your fair share of that growth? Like, this is a no-brainer to me.
I am curious with that and like executive leaders kind of seeing what's up, pulling away investments from Ecomm. But then you had the point of like 95% of purchases are probably digitally influenced. Like, what is the disconnect there? Like, why are leaders pulling away? Like, why can't they see that that's where the growth is going to come from?
Mid-tier and large brands are largely risk-averse. E-commerce and digital present ecosystems where you need to have a lot of knowledge before acting. Most executive teams understand the brick and mortar business inside out, 30 years of training. Go back all the way to MBA class of building brands, the 4Ps. That's the training. E-commerce doesn't follow the 4Ps. When you've been a practitioner in the middle of your career, maybe when you were a senior manager or an early director, and you got to experience e-commerce, what you're going to know is going to be radically, I'm using the word radically, different than if you came as a VP or an SVP and EVP and you had to adopt e-commerce. It's never going to be the same. For example, Emma, you can dive into the depths of what Salsify is. There is no senior executive in America who is running a CPG company who can define for you what Salsify does to the extent you need to know. They'll depend on someone 4 levels lower. But you ask them about brick and mortar, they'll even tell you who makes a shelving in store because of their training. Straightforward. And we can argue about all these things, but I'm fortunate, blessed, lucky, mentored, call it whatever it may be, to have experienced both sides of the fence very deeply.
I see. I'm wondering if, like, take these people that are like 4 levels below that have that very deep kind of subject matter expertise on something like a Salsify. I'm curious about like the next round of executive leadership, whether it might be like a generational kind of jump that I'm thinking of in my head. But do you think they'll be more equipped for like knowing more deeply about kind of e-commerce related things on such a tactical level? Or will we always have the executive leadership just sees things from like that very broad lens and pulls all the information up from the bottom?
What a fabulous question you just asked, right? Like, I'm glad someone's actually asking this question on a podcast.
Heck yeah.
Let's take it one level up, Emma. Why are senior executives who don't have the training hesitant to go more digital? Because their board of directors is not asking them those questions. Wall Street is barely asking them surface level questions. In 10 years, when Gen Z is the primary shopper wallet, we're 10 years away from that. Millennials are maybe 2 years away from being the primary shopper wallet. In the universe of CPG purchases, the change is already going to come by in 2 years. Millennials are going to start occupying VPs and SVP roles. In 10 years, board of directors will be millennials. The big difference, they're born with a digital phone in their hand. And hence their knowledge is going to be much more superior. There's nothing, I can't compete with a Gen Z or a millennial on digital knowledge, as I learn from my kids every single day. And you may say you're one of the CPG guys, but I'm learning something new every single day. So that said, there is a journey 2 to 10 years from now where I do believe digital is a word of the past. It's just business. We won't be having these silly conversations on Ecomm and who knows, Salsify. It's just life.
It's just life. Salsify. Just life. Love it.
I would urge everybody in a commercial role, if you're in marketing, especially marketing, let's leave the sales guys and gals alone for a few minutes. If you're in marketing, you're a VP of marketing, you're a director of marketing, you're an SVP of marketing, you're a CMO, you owe it to your brand, which is legendary over the time and has built equity, to be in pantries in America. Household pantries. In the last 18 months, you have lost households. You have lost depth and frequency in pantries. You owe it to your brand, because your brand is elite, to regain that. And one of your best anchors is being digital about it. That doesn't translate to e-commerce only. It translates to following the shopper on their path to purchase 24/7 on the digital journey. And one of my biggest pet peeves, when I hear CMO say TikTok is for Gen Zs only, I cannot stop laughing.
Now that we've covered misconceptions and miscalculations on the slowing of e-com investments and have tied things back to volume reduction based on inflationary pricing, let's get more specifically into how all of this then impacts retail media. Sri gave me this note pre-recording that mentioned that it's worth highlighting that retail media is now being owned by the CMO and the brand teams. So I asked him to elaborate here and connect it to everything else we've been discussing.
The way the retail media ecosystem originally started getting investments with brands was through sales teams, specific retail customer teams. So let's say the Walmart team, the Kroger team, etc., etc., etc. We're in a world where retail media now, at least the large ones, so Amazon ads, Walmart Connect, maybe Ahold USA, definitely Instacart, there's a handful that now have the inventory for both offsite and onsite. They're no longer e-commerce engines. They're true brand equity development engines. I'm not in a world where we have something like we counted 65 plus retail media networks influencing the US, both for endemic and non-endemic advertising. You can't vanilla spread your investments across 65 plus RMNs. So I'm just going to the top five now, and some of those are named. That said, in the world where there's 65 plus RMNs, you have to be picky and choosy. So if you pick the top five, they're moving away from being lower funnel e commerce only engines based on search to truly being brand companions on the media journey. For example, Amazon ads, I can confidently tell you, is a national media vehicle. It needs to be part of your national media. The greatest example I can give you is Thursday Night Football. Amazon's a partner. That's a national media vehicle. If you're taking that and you're monkeying around trying to do stuff on the lower funnel activation only, kind of missing the plot. Walmart's getting there if they pull off the Vizio TV acquisition from a streaming TV standpoint, national media vehicle. Like this is not that complicated. As inventory develops for offsite, keep your eyes on the price, on the ball. Think media versus lower funnel e-commerce only. And where does that belong? It belongs in the hand of the CMO in the marketing mix from day one. Otherwise, there's going to be a constant fight. Should it come from trade? Should it come from media? It's mine, it's yours. Media and brand equity development are owned and belong in the hands of the CMO and brand VPs. And as a result of that, it should always be equity development. And that's the role of retail media. Now, this is five out of, let's say, 65. The universe has 60 more. That 60 do not have the inventory to support anything national media or barely scratch the surface for offsite. Everyone runs to Meta, everyone runs to Google and says, I've got offsite inventory. But then if you have 65 such providers doing offsite inventory, you're just outbidding yourself. And the other thing I'd tell you to be very careful of as a brand marketer or a salesperson is even when you sign up for these offsite inventories, try to stack. If you're running a coupon that week, if you're running trade that week, which means now marketing and sales, which is probably a conversation for a different podcast, I feel strongly that we are 2, 3 years away from marketing and sales coming together as one team. It should always be about the brand. 5 to 7 retail media networks matter. The rest are really e commerce engines for lower funnel activation. Brand zone retail media, it should be in the mix. It should be an equity driving vehicle as much as it's a conversion driving vehicle.
I'm curious. I'm thinking about, we started talking about like investments in ecom kind of slowing down based on a decrease in volume, et cetera, tying back to inflation based pricing, yada, yada. Bringing it back to this point, I'm thinking about like with all of the retail media networks that exist, all 65 plus of them in what I'm assuming is just the US, and thinking about like if investments from the top down are being kind of squeezed at the moment, how does this trickle down and impact how brands are looking at investing in the different retail media networks? Like, do you think more brands are going to go harder with the 5 or 6 that matter, or and kind of forget about the bottom tier ones? Or how is that investment slowing down going to impact where brands are then investing and how across retail media?
So there's another force in the industry that's, I can't say new, it's been around in Europe for like 20 years. This is how they run retail media for 20 years, which is the in-store component is part of retail media. In the US, that is barely picking up traction. Why that is important, Emma, is you take a display in store, like an end cap. I was in the field every week for the last 3 years. Funnily enough, now that I'm not in that capacity, in the last month, I've only shot online. It's just weird how those things happen. But and it's proof in the pudding that display in store is actually worth less today than it was 4 years ago. And the simple reasoning and logic behind it is if 20% of the business is e-com and shopped online, then stores have definitely lost traffic to online. Brands are already writing checks. for those eyeballs online, which is what retail media is via search. Display should cost less. But are displays costing less? No, they're not. So for this great reconciliation to happen and for brands to be able to write the right story on retail media networks, in-store needs to be factored in. And again, merchants are not going to like this because it's their P&L and we're going to get into P&L wars, who owns what. But again, remember, a common goal, brands and retail, is only one thing: deliver for the consumer. Best products, best value, loyalty. That's the three anchors of anything. If we put that in mind, we won't have all these stupid P&L wars with each other, resulting in the same outcomes anyway. But all that said, I see these plethora of these 40, 50 retail media networks actually not going away. And I don't think they should, because they serve a purpose. Coming together. Let's say a distributor that supports 10,000 stores has one retail media network across those 10,000 stores that they buy for, across maybe 50 banners. And that becomes a consolidated retail media network that a brand can invest or not, depending on where they're muscling up, muscling back, what in-store support they have. And hence I say in-store needs to be really thought of as retail media sooner or later and included in the overall investment ecosystem. The top five, so the answer is top five national media, the rest of the pack, consolidation, careful choices, use retail media to muscle up, especially when you're giving value to the consumer, price discounting, end caps, display features, TPRs. Bring your strategy together, and that strategy will come together, Emma, when sales and marketing are one team.
I had this thought while Shri was talking, which led me to thinking about the reversal of the deprecation of the cookie. How did I get there? I will tell you. Our flywheel point of view is that just because the cookie is here to stay, it doesn't mean that you just give up on first-party data and the measurement capabilities of retail media, even if it's more expensive. That line of thought had me thinking about, okay, so if there is a push from the executive team of a brand to maybe decrease investment in retail media, how does the retail media industry deal with that? In combination with this added element of cookies not going away and retail media easily being center stage before that announcement. Let's pass that one on to Shri.
Ooh, unpopular opinion coming up.
Ooh. Oh boy.
I do think the cookie deprecation was actually a big advantage for retail media, because everything I just told you about national media, all of a sudden retail media became a viable alternative for cookie deprecation. Google is back in the mix now. So is Meta and all kinds of other platforms, streaming TV, streaming media, all are back in with cookie deprecation being a thing of the past and irrelevant, right? So I do think for retail media now, the only way they counter that is capabilities. Your inventory has to be world class to be able to do it. But if you're a smart marketer, the question you'll ask yourself when you build your marketing plans, if I put my dollars on Google for search, if I put my dollars on Walmart for search, and I build a plan on Walmart, it's full funnel activation. Google may be partial full funnel activation because you still have to parse out via Google shopping for the lower funnel activation to many places. There's commissions, all kinds of stuff going on. So I'd argue, again, there's only a handful of retail media networks which qualify. But for the ones that qualify, you have the ability to stand on your own. But what's the point of me saying that? I can scream from the top of my lungs. The RMNs on their own have to be able to state that publicly and defend it. I'm confident they have the ability, but I haven't heard anybody outside Amazon ads really pulling the trigger on that and actually moving forward with it.
That's a good closing thought. All right, very last question for you is I would love to know something that lives on your digital wish list, which just means it's like in a cart on an app, on a tab on your computer, however you prefer to shop, but something that just lives there that you won't actually purchase, and why?
Nike sneakers that sit on my wish list because I have 37. I only wear white sneakers. In the last 3 years, COVID taught me that being comfortable is important. I graduated from wearing all kinds of fancy shoes to only wearing white sneakers. I have 37 pairs at home. And unfortunately, mine, I'm a size 15, which means you can rarely find. So when I find them, I put them in the cart. And I have 17 in save for later on Amazon. And I have about 11 in my cart actively in Nike. And I'll constantly get messages no longer available. And then I'll put 2 new ones. So when 37 goes down and I give 2 away, donate them, I'll get two more. So if you saw my shoe closet, you just laugh. It's just a pile. So, but I love my sneakers. So
I love my sneakers too. I understand, but I like that. Like,
it's funny you asked me that question because
Yeah.
it's actually happening in my life that it's sitting in safe for later, like that many pairs.
well, I like that. Like 37 is the number that you've capped out at, where you're like, I can't pass.
The only reason I
37.
know, Emma, is because I was cleaning yesterday and I counted.
I love it. That's a great answer.
Woo! And that wraps up another episode of the Commerce Collective podcast from Flywheel. I am absolutely ecstatic that I finally got to record with the other half of the CPG guys. And if you forgot, I interviewed Peter Bond a few months back for the podcast. And hey, maybe someday we'll be just as big. A girl can dream. I've been your host, Emma Irwin, and we will see you next time.